So, welcome back everybody for our final session of this very interesting and challenging day full of discussions, and we are going to finish it with the cherry on the top. I hope. No, I'm sure of it. The carnation on the top, precisely. We are very happy to take the opportunity to have here Daniela, Melo, and Timothy Walker with us to have this presentation of the book that was edited by them, The Captain's Coup, From Dictatorship to Democracy in Portugal, 1974-1976, which is the first English edition of this manuscript published in Portugal in these dates, this very on the current in the mid 1975 and onwards by Wilfred Burchett. So this is the first time that these reports are being published in English. It is an edition with comments and analysis by Daniela, Melo, and Timothy Walker. They will explain in detail for sure the process of reaching out to this manuscript and to the idea around the book. I just want to highlight how important this is for Portuguese historiography, for anyone researching on Portuguese history of this period. It was a very controversial period, a very intense period, and it's interesting to see that this journalist, Wilfred Burchett, obviously well known from his work in a journalistic report, he is not necessarily that neutral, gray academic person. On the contrary, he's definitely someone who took a side, who had a position, and that is also seen and felt through his reports during the Portuguese transition process. I will just thank you, both of you, very much for bringing this to the forum. I think it's also a very important legacy of Atlantic and transatlantic history, a very important period in Portuguese and transatlantic history as well. So I will now give the floor to you, and thank you so much. And I will have a lot of questions, but afterwards. So thank you, thank you so much.
So again, thank you for the opportunity to present this work. I've already given you a sense of what I usually do as a historian, and this has nothing to do with that. It's a big departure for me to be talking about this project, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about how it happened. We're going to split the presentation into two parts. My job is to tell you a little bit about the author of the book, Wilfred Burchett, and how we came to this subject and how we succeeded in bringing it to press, which was not an easy task, and I'll share that with you. And then Daniela will talk a little bit about her analysis of Burchett's treatment of the 25 de Abril and the Carnation Revolution and the Movimento das Forças Armadas. So this is Wilfred Burchett on the left, and this is him in about 1968. By that time, he was an extraordinarily well-known author, journalist. He had written dozens of books, and he is now virtually unknown, particularly in the United States. He's originally Australian, but he's been called one of the most important journalists of the 20th century. And so I want to tell you a little bit about how he finds his way to Portugal in 1974. But first, I'll tell you about how we became aware of his books. So Daniela and I, she was on her Fulbright year in 2010, 2011, and I came over and we went book shopping, as one does, and we were in an alfarrabista near to Largo de Trindade Coelho, Largo de Misericordia, right in the middle of Lisbon in the Bairro Alto. And we came across the book on the left with the red cover. And Daniela and I looked at it, and we looked at the author's name. We'd never heard of this, and we were both kind of astonished that we had never encountered this book, and we didn't know who Wilfred Burchett was. And the person who owned the Alpha Revista told us that there was a second book, the green color one, that came out. The first one was published in the spring of 75. The next one was published in the spring of 76. And it's a much shorter continuation. But at the time it came out, the book on the left was a bestseller in Portugal. The first tiragem, the first number of volumes produced was 20,000 volumes, and it sold out. It was a top seller. And the second one had a tiragem of 5,000 copies, and it also sold out. But then it was almost virtually forgotten, and it was never published in English. But the book on the left, within a year of publication, it was published in Italian, it was published in Spanish in a Mexican edition, it was published in Japanese, and it was published in Norwegian. But it was, and this gives you a sense of how well respected and how well known Burchett was as a political journalist, but it was never published in English. And so we were puzzled by that, and we wanted to find out more about the man himself. So this is a Cambridge University Press, University of New South Wales. He has another Cambridge University Press book about his work. This is an autobiography about him, his life as a rebel journalist. He was born in 1911, so he has his political awakening during the Great Depression. And he was always solidly and strongly someone who had been influenced by international socialism. He's described, again, as one of the most important journalists of the 20th century. He wrote more than 30 books. The two that I've just shown you are the only two that were never published in English. The rest of his catalog was available in English and many other languages. So he covers every war. He gets his start as a journalist in World War II, but before that, he had married a German Jewish woman and helped to get people out of Nazi Germany into Britain, because he was based in Britain before the war. He had moved there from Australia. But his real break as a journalist happens right at the end of the Second World War. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a second. Studs Terkel, if you're familiar with American journalists, he was a really top journalist who interviewed Americans, but he interviews Burchett on 24 October 1977, and he says, there are two journalists living today who are rock-like in their integrity and their courage. One is Wilfred Burchett. The Australian journalist, you might say, is a universal journalist. He's been everywhere, and often every side calls upon him because he's right there with his information that others lack, because the information is from his own experience in being there. And so Burchett has this reputation for getting the story, getting the facts, and people across the political spectrum referred to him because they knew that he had facts on the ground and that his facts were, generally speaking, highly reliable. Well, Burchett gets his break because he's the first Western journalist on the ground in Hiroshima after the atomic bombing. While most of the press corps were on board of the USS Missouri to cover the signing of the armistice at the end of World War II, Burchett illegally evaded United States security cordon, and he traveled to central Hiroshima to report on the victims of the bombing. He had heard that a month after the event, people were still dying, and he wanted to know why. So he's the first guy to break the story about radiation sickness. He calls it the atomic plague, and it was splashed across newspapers around the world on the 5th of September, 1945. He actually filed the story under the name of, well, he sent the story secretly to his brother, Peter, which is why the byline is given as Peter Burchett. That was to avoid US censorship. And so, as you can well imagine, this made him absolutely no friends among the leadership of the United States military, and most of the Western Allied powers were not very happy to have this story brought out either. But he is instrumental in getting people to understand the effect of nuclear attack. He goes on to cover the Chinese Communist Revolution in the late 1940s. During the Cold War, he covers Korea and Vietnam. Here he is in Korea in 1951. He's surrounded by other members of the press corps. And because of his politics And because of his cultivating contacts with non-Western powers, he had access that other journalists didn't have. But he also reported the stories that other journalists couldn't generally get or were unwilling to write about. So he writes a variety of books. In 1952, he publishes a book called China's Feet Unbound, which was about the potential for the new communist government in China. He writes the book Plain Perfidy about how the United States undermined the peace process in Korea. And again, none of this is making him any friends in the halls of power in the West. He embeds with the Vietnamese soldiers in the North, the Viet Cong and the Viet Minh. He's one of the only Western journalists to travel and fight and report on the actual experience of Vietnamese troops fighting against the Americans. And he spends months traveling along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. He is invited to interview Ho Chi Minh. He had extraordinary access to Ho Chi Minh and some of the major generals of the North Vietnamese leadership. And so, again, the Western powers are aware that he's doing this. They don't like what he's saying, but they know that what he's saying is important because he generally is an even-handed, fact-reporting reporter who the Western powers pay very close attention to. In 1967, he writes a book, 68, he writes a book very prescient saying Vietnam will win this war. The Vietnamese are going to outclass the Americans militarily. And then after the war ends, he writes a book called Grasshoppers and Elephants, explaining why the Vietnamese won the war. Again, very embarrassing to particularly the United States, but also the Australians. The Australians tried to revoke his passport. They were very upset with him as an Australian citizen. And for years, he had to fight legally to get his passport back. He traveled for a long time using I forget what you call them. Daniela can explain maybe better than I, but they were traveling papers that were issued to him by the Vietnamese. Sorry? I think that's what it's called. They were issued by the Vietnamese, the Communist Chinese government, and so on. But he didn't have his Australian passport for a long time. In 1971, he was in New York for a United Nations meeting to cover it, and Henry Kissinger arranged for Burchett to come down for a breakfast at the White House because Kissinger wanted to pick his brain about Ho Chi Minh and about the war objectives of the Vietnamese. They kept it very quiet, but this is a cartoon from 2010 recounting this, but Burchett was brought to the White House specifically to meet with Kissinger because they valued what he was saying. When he published, the facts usually bore out the reporting that he was making. So, in 1974, in April, Burchett is living in Paris. He spoke fluent French from having dealt with the French-speaking Vietnamese. He was there when he hears about a coup d'etat in Lisbon, Portugal. And he writes in the book about how immediately he knew that he had to get there because, not necessarily specifically because of what the implications were for Portugal itself, but what the implications would be for the rest of the Portuguese-speaking world, particularly in Africa. He knew that this coup d'etat, if the MFA was true to their word about wanting decolonization, that would have extraordinary effect on the balance of power, particularly in Africa. So he goes down to Lisbon. He's not there for the 25 de Abril, but he's there 3 days later. He's on the first flight from Paris to Lisbon as soon as the airport in Lisbon opened. And he is there for the 1st of May. So he doesn't see these extraordinary events. By the way, some of the photos that I'm showing you are photos that we've used in the book. The first books, when they were published in Portuguese, they had no illustrations, but we wanted to make sure that for an English-speaking audience that wasn't familiar with Portugal or the 25 de Abril, we wanted to have good images. And one of the great pleasures of doing this project was to have contact with some of the photographers who are still living. And one of the guys in particular who provided about half the photos in the book has become a dear friend while, in Lisbon. It's not Eduardo Guerreiro. He just passed away earlier this year. And it was a huge loss, and we lament that we never had the chance to meet him in person. But the other photographer, Fernando Ricardo, provided quite a lot of the photos for our book. So Burchett doesn't know anything about this, but he doesn't witness this personally, but as soon as he gets to Lisbon, he arrives on the 28th of April, and he's put up at the Tivoli Hotel on Avenida de Liberdade. And he goes to change some traveler's checks, and the director of the bank, one of the directors of the bank, was also a director of the Sierra Nova publishing house. And what Burchett is reminded of is that his books on Vietnam, on Korea, they were being translated into Portuguese and published in Portugal. And they were required reading at the military academy for the guys who were going off to fight in Guinea-Bissau and Angola and Mozambique. Why? Because the Portuguese military wanted their officers to understand how the United States was getting bested by troops in this asymmetrical warfare, how it was that the United States was being defeated, in effect, by non-Western troops, by guerrillas. And so immediately, Burchett is a celebrity, especially among the members of the armed forces movement, because they've been reading his stuff for years. And it opened so many doors for him that his books were already well known in Lisbon. So he does witness Fernando Ricardo's photo. This is in Praça dos Restauradores in Lisbon. He witnesses this extraordinary outpouring of popular sentiment about the ability to express yourself politically. And this is one of the things that really struck him, Burchett, about the Portuguese Revolution was the passion with which Portuguese people embraced a new political freedom. So here we are, 40 years later, in 2010, 2011, and as we found out more and more about Burchett, and we found out more and more about his experience in Portugal, we felt that these books needed to be available to an English-speaking audience, not only because of Burchett's position as an extraordinary journalist in the 20th century, but also because of the historic value of the interviews that he did as a journalist. He had access to all of the top people of the armed forces movement. He had access to, and he sought out people all over the country of Portugal. He went to Trás-os-Montes, he went to the Alentejo, and he provides insights and windows into that zeitgeist, that spirit of the times in the summer of 74 and into the fall of 75, that are really unique. And Daniela will address some of that analysis that he does. Well, our problem here, though, was that we needed, in order to do these books in English, we were not going to reverse engineer them from Portuguese back to English. We needed the original manuscripts, and we had no idea how to find them. We asked a lot of people. We went to the original translators, their families. The translators had passed away. Exactly. We went to Sierra Nova. They didn't have them. We went to the Portuguese Communist Party because they had a good relationship with Burchett. They didn't have them. No one seemed to have them. But in the course of and this took years, by the way. We thought that this would be an easy and fast project. We spent a long time trying to track down the original manuscripts until someone gave us the email of George Burchett, Wilfred Burchett's son, who's an artist living in Vietnam. Burchett remarried. He married a woman from Bulgaria. George was born in Vietnam. And George and I have struck up an email correspondence, which goes back a few years now. But he said, look, when my father passed away in 1983, I deposited all of his papers into the National Library of Australia. And that stuff was just becoming available online, but none of it had been digitized. So through email correspondence with archivists at the Library of Australia, we found out that there were 55 boxes of Burchett's material, none of which had been cataloged. So what do? We realized that the stuff was organized chronologically, and we identified a few boxes where we thought the manuscripts might be. And sure enough, we asked the archivist there to look through those boxes line by line specifically, and they found versions of the original manuscript in varying stages of refinement. And we had the final clean copy that was sent to his publishers, and that was in a typescript manuscript. So it looks like this. That's the first page. And it's at the National Library of Australia. And we couldn't go to Australia ourselves, so we had it made into a PDF file, 1,000 pages of material that was then sent to us, and we used that as the basis for the working copy for the book in English. We just did not want to lose his original voice, and translating it from Portuguese back to English wouldn't have worked. We wanted the originals. So these are the two photographers who were most essential to the book. This is them about 11 years ago. Fernando Ricardo is on the left, and he did about half the images. He donated them, thankfully, to the project. And Eduardo Guerreiro has, I think, 3 or 4 different photos in our book. It was Guerreiro's photo, this wonderful one here. Sorry, this one. I really love that photo. And that's at the PED headquarters in Antonio Maria Cardoso. All right, so I think with that my part of this story, I believe, comes to an end. Oh no, one final photo. We didn't have a photo of Burchett himself. And so I emailed George in Vietnam and I said, hey, you don't have any photos of your dad, do you? Because the press wasn't willing to buy another photo to use in the book. And so about, I don't know, a week before we sent it off to the publisher, he sent us this magnificent photo that is roughly, I can't say for sure that he's holding a piece of the manuscript in his hand, but it's about the same time that he was working on The Captain's Coup in his home in Paris. And we can thank George Burchett for that magnificent photo. Okay, I'm going to stop now, and Daniela will tell you a little bit about Burchett's analysis of the revolution. There you go.
So I know that right now we are the only thing standing between you and dinner. So I will try to do this as quickly as possible, though I am looking forward to your comments and questions if you have them. I will talk, as Tim pointed out, about Burchett's analysis. So our division of labor in this book was that Tim did the painstaking work of transcribing the manuscript and annotating most of it. So this is a manuscript that we felt needed annotations for contemporary readership that would not understand, that would not remember, that would not be aware of all of the characters of the revolution, because Burchett's book is in fact a great introduction for anyone who doesn't know anything about the revolution. He in fact wrote it for an international public, introducing this revolutionary process to this international public. So our version of the book comes with this carefully done annotations. And the other thing that is important to understand about, the second part, my part of the labor, because I did do something here. So we divided it so that I would do the analysis. So there's an introduction to the book that is written by me, in which I try to enquadrar, só me está a vir a palavra em português, é incrível. It's been a long day, frame, in which I try to frame his work, both in the sphere of journalism and what it meant to have a man of his experience. No worries. What it meant to have a journalist with his expertise, with his life history, with his publication record, with his antagonistic relationship with the Western powers, so to say, in the midst of the Cold War, come with all of that baggage and all of that knowledge into Portugal and unpack the Portuguese Revolution with that wealth, that richness, right, of understanding, of contextualizing, of being able to compare and contrast with previous revolutionary processes that he had himself been a part of. So when I first read this book, when we first read this book, I mean, it's an incredible read. In the book, I refer to it as, he has a sort of Orwellian style to the way that he writes. It's very, well, I mean, it's revolutionary, so, anyway. In the sense that, very vivid depictions of the feelings, of the moment, of the space, of the structure, of, like, you feel that he carries you there in your writing, right? And I'll be reading a short passage about his visit to Dartmouth that I think really exemplifies the type of tone that he strikes throughout this. But at the same time, he is overlaying this with his own understanding of what's happening, his own knowledge about revolutionary processes, about revolutionary elites, and about the masses and how they react and interact with these new emerging types of actors. At the same time, and Tim mentioned this earlier, he is a journalist with a point of view. He is not a journalist who's coming into the Portuguese Revolution or into any of these conflicts with an impartial pen, if so were to say. He considered himself an advocacy journalist. He was a Cold War journalist, and he had a point of view that was sympathetic to the movements of liberation across the world, to decolonization around the world. He saw a lot of legitimacy in these movements against the European superpowers, against imperialism and whatnot. So it's very clear that this is his lens, that this is his understanding, but he makes it clear. It's not hidden, it's transparent in the way that he presents his reporting as well. So he's definitely an anti-colonialist journalist, and he's presenting that view throughout his books. As Tim briefly mentioned as well, he captures the zeitgeist of the Portuguese Revolution. I've read quite a bit about this period and very different interpretations of what was happening, but he's a strong writer, a strong analyst, but he also has an ability to tease out of average people information that we don't often see about the Portuguese Revolution. So, one of the common critiques academically about the Portuguese Revolution is how top-down explanations tend to be, so how focused on the elites or on the elite political parties. And I think those are natural places to start, the study of any revolutionary process. And he goes there as well. He is going to interview Otelo, Melantunos, Vasco Lourenço, etc. Right? So he interviews all of these people who we might consider stakeholders, right, in the revolutionary process. But then he also sees the masses. He also sees the average person, the farmer, the peasant, the factory worker, the fisherman, as being stakeholders in the revolutionary process. And he goes out of his way to have these long interviews as well, try to really understand the point of view of those individuals as they're living through the revolution. So what you get with this book, this is not an academic book. This is a book written by a journalist who's very well informed about this, who tells you what his point of view is, who is actually quite excited about what he's seeing. He sees a lot of promise from the first days of the revolution. He immediately senses that there's something about the Portuguese Revolution and the dynamic relationship between the armed forces movement and how the people on the streets are seeing that movement. Even the moral pressure that the demonstrations on the streets are putting on the MFA to stick to democratization and decolonization and development, right, as promised. He sees that as auspicious for the Portuguese revolutionary movement. But at the end of the day, this is also a historical record. It's those interviews, it's the interviews in particular with average people that I find most poignant in his telling of the revolution. So I just have a few pictures here of some examples of people that he interviewed. I mean, he had several conversations with Melantunes. He came to, I think he doesn't say it like this, but it's very clear that he respected, the way Melantunes thought and gave great credibility to his reading of the situations at different points in the revolution. This is an excerpt of Melantunes speaking to Burchett in the book, in which Melantunes emphasizes that point that Tim made earlier. It was a great shock for the young Portuguese officers to know that it was impossible for the United States, despite fantastic military technology, to defeat the people of a small, underdeveloped country. The lessons of the Vietnamese struggle described in your books played the most important role in the political development of the younger officers. There were factors which even right-wing officers could not ignore. I'll come back to the idea of the hot summer later during discussion if you want to talk about his coverage of that. He also interviews Álvaro Cunhal, he interviews Saraiva de Carvalho, Rosa Coutinho, Ramalhianes, Vasco Lourenço. So he gets, a pretty interesting breadth of the different positionings within the armed forces movement. But it's when he comes again to the workers, the farmers, the fishermen, that I think he really shines. Having said that, I now would like to share a passage from the book with you all, as I said, and then we can open up for discussion. So this passage is from his visit to Trás-os-Montes. So I don't know of many, a number of journalists traveled outside of Lisbon, of course, but I don't know of many that have reported from Trás-os-Montes during the revolution. And this particularly speaks to me because I'm from the north. I'm from, the juncture between, I'm close to all three, Douro, Minho, and Trás-os-Montes. I'm from Felgueiras, But the Trás-os-Montes he's describing is still the north I remember growing up in the 1980s. And it's the north that my parents and my grandparents grew up in. And it's a reality that has completely vanished from Portugal within 50 years. And that, I'd say for the best, vanished for the most part. But that, I think we can bring this discussion up to now because there are so many challenges to the memory of the revolution, to what that revolution was about. And I think that reading these types of passages really highlights and brings home to people what a transformational event this revolution was for average Portuguese people. Okay, even the ones who were not engaged in political parties and whatnot. So here we go. This goes in two parts. He spent about 10 days in Trás-os-Montes, and he starts by giving the reader, a basic understanding of the region and what the region's about. So he says, the Trás-os-Montes covers some 10,000 square kilometers with a population of a little over 400,000. Proportionately, it is the area which provides the greatest number of emigrants. Per capita production is the lowest in the country, 76% of the population being engaged in agriculture, producing mainly for their own consumption. At the headquarters of the democratic movement in Mirandela, in the very heart of Trás-os-Montes, João Vicente, a specialist in the economic social situation in the region, explained some of the reasons that pushed people into emigration. This will sound familiar for those of you from the Azores, of course, because it's a lot of the same push factors. The first step is almost always Lisbon or Porto in search of work and a better life. In Lisbon, there is one doctor for every 400 inhabitants. In the Trás-os-Montes, it's one for every 3,000. In Lisbon, 90% of houses have bathrooms and kitchens. 70% have running water. Here, the proportion is less than 10% for bathrooms, kitchens, and running water. In Lisbon, the average per capita consumption of electricity is 800 kilowatts. Here, it is 60 kilowatts. Most of the tiny farms are split into 6 or more parcels of land, impossible to cultivate by modern methods, even if credits are available to buy draft animals and implements. Around Mirandela, 80 to 90% of people are illiterate. Farming methods, even those who know the alphabet cannot usually read. Farming methods are 2 to 3 centuries behind the times. Because of emigration, 80% of those who work in the fields are old people and children. There are no markets for what people produce, and where there are markets, there is no transport to get the produce to them. So here he's laying the ground. And as I told you, I mean, this feels very real to me, very palpable. I mean, of my 4 grandparents, they were all farmers, my grandparents. Of 4 of them, only 1 knew how to read and write. I had 3 illiterate grandparents up north, and this was typical. I mean, I remember that in my street, there was nobody over 60, 65 who knew how to read or write, and this was just common, you know. Now we get to the more anthropological part of the of the visit. So, with José Francisco Nereu as guide, friend, and reserve driver, we toured the Trás-os-Montes area for 10 days. One of our early stops was as a small, somnolent town of Lebução, on the road from Mirandela to Montalegre, far from the ordinary tourist routes. It still is far from the tourist routes, okay? A small boy guided us to what he insisted was the only functioning restaurant. It was, in fact, the living room of 2 black-gowned elderly spinsters, Cândida and Clotilde. José quickly established that they could provide us with a meal. At the single dining table were 2 men, one solidly built and ruddy-faced with sleeves rolled up to the elbow and mobile oil stamped across his red shirt. The other, slighter and smaller, also in his shirt sleeves. They introduced themselves as Macedo and Sebastião, respectively. Macedo asked if we were French, as that was the common language of our group. And when we replied that we were Bulgarian and Australian, respectively, he roared and slapped his thighs. Clotilde, Cândida, quick, hide in the kitchen, PCP, PCP. There's a real live communist arrived, the sort your priest tells you eats babies for breakfast. To us, he explained, I'm the imperialist agent of Mobil Oil at Mirandela, and Sebastião drives the petrol truck outside. The 2 were obviously frequent visitors and on good terms with the sisters, one of whom came in holding a panting fawn and white rabbit by its ears for our inspection, as in some fish restaurants a flapping trout is brought in for approval before it goes into the frying pan. Bulgaria. I've read about it, continued Macedo. It was under the heel of fascists like ours 25 or so years ago. It was the country of Dimitrov. I read all about the Leipzig trial. Go on. With a broad wink at us, he said to Clotilde, run and tell the priest that the communists have come to take over. Turning to us, he said, they are typical fruits of fascism, these 2, priest-ridden as you can find. He apparently added something which José Francisco deemed better not to translate, because Clotilde, who was preparing our end of the table, reddened and said solemnly, our priest has been here for 35 years. He's a good man, never chases after women, and he has never talked about communists eating babies for breakfast. He is only interested in church affairs. We asked Clotilde what she thought about the changes since 25th of April. By her stammering reaction, it was obvious that she was not used to having her opinion asked about anything. Tell them what the priest told you last Sunday, roared Macedo. After a pause, she said, all we hope is that things won't change too quickly. We asked if she thought that ending the wars in Africa would be a good thing. Cândida, who arrived from the kitchen at that moment, said, it would be good if our men didn't get killed anymore, but... And she hastened back into the kitchen, red-faced. José explained later that she probably thought she had uttered a heresy by suggesting that anything good could come from such a regime. My wife gave birth on 26 April, said Macedo, and when the priest came for the christening, I said, good that he was born on this day. He'll grow up under democracy. The priest replied, this godless regime won't last long. That's what they're like, those priests.
Just very quickly, let me say something about language. Burchett.
Oh, let me turn.
Burchett spoke fluent French, and so he was able to speak with most of the officers of the MFA and with many of the politicians directly in French. But he used interpreters when he was out in the countryside. The Estado Novo educational regime taught French, as you all know, but that was why he was able to have direct conversations, much like today, with French being the main language.
Yeah, and if I can add just one final note about this passage, I think that for those of you who grew up, I didn't grow up, I don't have any direct memory of the revolution because I was born after it, but I think those of us who experienced even living in the poorest regions of the country, and also in the ones where the Catholic Church had the most say, can find a lot of resonance in this particular episode, right, that I read about Candida and Clotilde. I mean, but there's so much, even in just those 2 pages that I shared with you. There's the role of women not being able to, or not being willing, not being comfortable to speak. Spinster women whose only opportunity to make some money is to serve meals in their living room, right? Bringing a rabbit by its ears for them to check. The role of the Catholic Church in shaping the way that a lot of people in the villages were experiencing what was happening far away in Lisbon, right? As the trusted source of information. The anti-communism, right? That is present throughout. So I think there's a lot of comparison here with what I know happened in the Azores during this period as well, but also with the social transformation that came afterwards, of course.
So yeah, thank you so much. I mean, it's not even a surprise after these readings and these presentations how interesting and how colorful this book is, and now the register that we can get from these moments that is actually not that much common to have this sort of foreign observators going to not dark but deep countryside and having this expression. I will open the floor for questions, but it just haunts me how a journalist that has so many experiences in foreign countries, in the other side of the fighting of anti-colonialism, resistance, anti-capitalism, communists, guerrillas and movements. How was that he was so impressed with the Portuguese? I mean, I was reading this change between the first book and the second book, so between 1974 and then after the hot summer, how much it must have been wonderful to see. I have to say it because it's something that I would really, really like to have lived. How much amazing it must have been to be in Portugal during these first months, because he was a believer in that something could turn out from this Portuguese situation that hadn't happened before in other places, right? So that's something that it's really interesting, and how rich it is to have his observations and his point of view for someone who has this extensive experience in so many different realities. So it's something I was wondering, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but did he went to the Portuguese colonies, or did he went to Angola? Oh,
that's his next book.
Oh, okay. That must have been amazing.
Yeah, he so thoroughly appreciated the implications for Africa that as soon as he was done reporting on Portugal, he goes to Angola and Mozambique, and his very next book, in fact, which does appear in English, is about independence movements across the southern part of Africa, and he includes
Angola and Mozambique.
But other
South Africa,
Rhodesia. Yeah, and so it's fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I now open the floor. Yes, Luís Nuno. You have to use it.
Not really a question. It's just first of all, congratulations on your work. I'm just checking here something just to make sure that I'm not trying to say anything wrong. No. Congratulations on your work, and I think there was the Portuguese the commission of that is celebrating the April 25 is doing the opposite. It's translating to Portuguese some books on the Portuguese Revolution that were never published in Portuguese before, although they are mostly books by academics, not this kind of. Because I think there was there are, and I'm this is just a personal note. I'm thinking about my father's personal library. I think there are dozens of books published by journalists, observers, mostly foreigners, some from Portugal as well, some well-known like Avelino Rodrigues and others, but there are dozens of books. And I was just checking, Público published some of them in this collection, Os Dias da Revolução. They recovered some of those original publications from the mid-70s, late 70s. Yeah, I think so, but it does not include Burchett. So one of the things that should be done is to republish also the Portuguese versions. And let me just say one last thing. While I was listening to you, I quickly checked on the National Library database on the edition. And the copies are there because I also would like to read them in Portuguese for a project that I'm working on. So thank you very much for rediscovering this author. But just an interesting note. Do you know who translated Stão Monteiro, Nuno Brederode dos Santos, and Augusto Abeleira were some of the translators of no, and Stão Monteiro and they work for Seara Nova, who was the publisher. So yeah, some of the best writers, right, and Nuno Brederode dos Santos. Yes. In Expresso for years. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I mean, I couldn't put this book down when I first got my hands on it. It's a great read. Beginning to end. It's amusing, right, in many ways, but it's so thick, right, with history and overlaid with analysis and all that. It's great. And the interviews, they're lengthy interviews, as you will see. It's not just snippets of what he spoke about with his people. There's entire segments, big segments of big interviews with these individuals. The good news is the book came out in April. It was immediately bought by Edições from Almedina that are they're translating our version of the book, and it's going to come out late October, early November. I don't know how they came to that decision, but yes, they retranslated. That was out of my hands. But they are going to bring this version with my essay and Tim's preface and Tim's annotations. It's all going to come, and we're going to launch it. At least the plan now is to launch it around November, and to the parts in which he writes about the 25 November, which is the second book, is mostly about what happened during the 25 November and afterwards, to basically take advantage of that to bring the discussion into current discussions about the 25 November in Portugal. Go ahead.
Yeah. So you want to turn that up? Thanks. The other thing I didn't, and probably it should be clear to you, it's obvious, but we combined both of the books into this one book so that it's all in one volume. Tariq Ali is a Pakistani-British political writer and filmmaker. He's a political dissident who's been around for a long time. He has a very good relationship with the press, Verso press, that eventually published the book. Let me digress. We had a very hard time finding a publisher for this book. We thought that, hey, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the Portuguese Revolution. Lots of university presses will be interested in this publication. It's a very important journalist. No one would publish it. We had a very hard time, and often university presses wouldn't respond when we sent out our prospectus. And I have to say, it was a pretty well-argued prospectus, if I say so myself. Eventually, we were advised by another historian to approach a non-university press. Verso is it used to be the New Left Review. It's a publisher of political left
Probably the best
literature,
known.
probably the best known one. And they had published Burchett's book about Hiroshima years ago. And they had also published another thing about Burchett. But in any case, they were very excited about it, and they decided to publish. So we signed a contract with them, and Tariq Ali came with that deal because they wanted to give Tariq Ali an outlet for a essay that he had written in the late 70s about the importance of the Portuguese Revolution. So
Yeah, and it's an essay that was written after the revolution as well. So we thought it would be best placed in, as an afterword, so to say.
Yeah.
And he had the direct relationship with Burchett himself. They
knew
each
one another
and whatnot. But in the Portuguese version, the essay by Tariq Ali is not there. So that's only in the English version.
Thank you. Any more questions, comments? Okay, Licina, yes.
Oh, there's one.
And Florence, did you raise your hand? No.
Thanks so much for presenting this work. And from your presentation, this work has a lot of layers, right? This is not a common book that you kind of research and then just put out there. You're working on someone else's topics. You're trying to add and interpret. So maybe I think the question is, what was the hardest part and the most interesting and most fulfilling part for doing this kind of book that you did? Because it's a very specific kind of work that with a lot of layers and moments, tracing back information and so on. So the hardest part and the most rewarding for you guys.
Just a couple quick comments. So pedagogically, I'd been teaching about the Portuguese Revolution as part of a survey course about the history of Portugal that I do through our Portuguese Studies Center at University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. And on any given semester, about a third of my students are Portuguese descendants, right? So I thought I knew a lot. I did know a lot about the Portuguese Revolution. So that wasn't the hard part. The practical hard part was finding the original manuscript and then getting a copy of it and then taking a PDF in TypeScript and making a Microsoft Word document out of it. And some of the pages were distorted. They were blurry. We had to go back to the original Portuguese to see what it might have been. But in most cases, we have very high confidence that the text is exactly as Burchett wrote it. There were very minor changes, editorial changes. That was the hard part for me. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. I mean, the manuscript, I found it riveting, so I wanted other people to read it. I didn't have any challenges with seeing the value within it. I would say that in the writing of my analysis that precedes Burchett's book, it's distilling, trying to decide what information to keep and what information to not keep from a life so richly lived, while being fair to Burchett and his personality, his work, and to the many criticisms of him as well during his life. I mean, when we say that he was a very well respected journalist by many of his colleagues, from the big newspapers, from the New York Times, from the big places. He clearly, had a well-respected name, but at the same time, he was also the source of just vitriolic attacks of him being a traitor, of him reporting for the other side, of him taking sides in the Cold War and the side not being the side that, he was born into. So, there's a lot of those accusations are still out there. As he was accused of being a KGB officer, right? He had this really weird relationship with the U.S. government in which for the first half of the Cold War, they basically banned him from anything that they have the power to ban him from. Like, he couldn't get a visa to come to the United States. He wasn't allowed, at least by the Americans, like into areas that they controlled in various conflicts and whatnot. But at the same time, come the 1970s, and given his personal friendship, it was not just that they knew each other. He considered Ho Chi Minh one of his closest friends, right? He knew him very well. He knew that conflict from the inside. The Americans are saying, we don't care about this guy. Everything he says is a lie. That's the official line of the US government. While at the same time, as one of the slides that Tim showed highlighted, it's the beginnings of talking about a peace process in Vietnam with the Nixon administration, right? And they allow him to go to a UN conference. I mean, he comes into a UN conference, and then Kissinger has him secretly come for a breakfast at the White House with him so that he can, tease out any information that he can about where Ho Chi Minh's mind really is. So he ends up doing this like backroom diplomacy. And there's multiple examples of that. He ends up doing this backroom diplomacy in the Cold War because in many ways, the Americans are saying they don't trust him, but in practice, they know that his reporting is the most accurate reporting, and his takes are the most clear-eyed takes on where the Vietnamese are. And the Vietnamese trust him because he gained their trust with their reporting and his entire life story, so to say. So capturing all...
Yeah. Daniela checked through using WikiLeaks documents. Not just that, but Burchett's writing is being excerpted for daily briefings within the United States government. Publicly, they're saying that he's a liar, that he's a communist. Internally, they're reading everything you wrote.
I mean, all of those have been declassified as far as I know now. Like, you can go back and see the daily briefings of the Nixon administration, and like, there's every section on Asia comes with whatever Burchett reported on that day about what's happening on that to the desk of the president. Yes, the CIA prepared daily briefings that the president reads, right? Still reads. Exactly. So officially, they're discrediting him right and left, right? When the news leaks about this secret meeting, Kissinger says it never happened, right? But I mean, we know it happened. It eventually got confirmed on all sides. But the truth is, they were taking him quite seriously. Like, he so seriously as to engage him. I mean, he was engaged even earlier than that by the Americans in trying to broker the releasing of prisoners of war, right?
In Korea and Vietnam.
Sorry, but not only Portugal. Was he ever hurt by Kissinger?
So, I also comment on that. This goes back to Licinius. It's like how complex this person really is, and to be able to both say, here's what he brings on Portugal, but here's all the other baggage behind it, right? Because he's such an incredible character from the Cold War. What I found really extremely interesting, and I mentioned this in my analysis as well, is that it's the absence of the United States from his take on the Portuguese Revolution. It's not that it's not there. I mean, the first part of the book, he spends quite a bit of time explaining Portuguese colonialism, explaining, American investment in big companies, big American companies, and their investment in Portugal, basically trying to explain the structure of political and economic power, right, within the country to an outside audience. Here's what he doesn't talk about. He doesn't talk about, Carlucci being a CIA agent. He doesn't talk about, the CIA wanting to do a Chile-style, coup in Chile. He doesn't go there in his analysis of the Portuguese Revolution.
No.
And but I mean, he's aware of these conspiracies. I know he's aware because I was looking for these materials, and he wrote for a number of newspapers. He was publishing for Le Monde quite a lot during this period while he was in Portugal about what was happening in Portugal. And there he covers some, because I mean, I imagine the editor asked him for a story on the conspiracy theories, right? But I don't think he took them seriously, because if he had, he would have gone there, but he didn't go there, right? It's a pretty level-headed presentation of what's happening in the revolution, even the 25th of November, right? He gives a lot of credence, for instance, to, he explains how the communists are seeing that, right? How the far left is seeing that, the left the left to the left of the PCP. He explains how, but he explains the Melanchthon's understanding of it as well. And he doesn't end with the sort of apocalyptic, the revolution's gone, everything is lost. Quite the contrary, right? For someone who's so clear about their positioning and their enthusiasm for the armed forces movement and, for the path of the Portuguese Revolution, he sounds concerned, but not necessarily, dismayed or anything like that, and here's a thing about Burchett as well. He died soon after.
He dies in 83.
But he was constantly reassessing his positions. Early on in the 1950s, he was very enthusiastic about the Chinese Revolution, but then he became really disenchanted with Mao and what, the Cultural Revolution and all of that, right? He gave the benefit of doubt to the Cambodians, only to then say, oh my God, that was completely wrong. I really read that, and he was very open about this, right? The one revolutionary that he felt beginning through end was always true to their ideal was Ho Chi Minh, and he also talked quite a bit about that. But sorry, I'm rambling on now.
Just to wrap up, I think we've given you a sense. At the end of the day, Daniela and I approached this project because we felt it was historically important to get it out in English, that it was a historical document, and that it would give insight to the revolution for a key document, his book or books that were not available in English. And so we hope that this then will spark further conversation and more scholarship. I think that I was very surprised that university presses were not interested in picking up this volume, and I can't say for sure why, but it may have something to do with the continued reputation or the blackening of Burchett's reputation, even 50 years after the event. So
we have a few working theories. They might have also have a hard time placing it. Yeah. I think it's not necessarily just a political science book, and it's not necessarily a history book, and it's not necessarily just journalism.
We have one final question.
Yeah.
Or two.
Oh, two.
Sorry.
Oh, three.
First of all, when you received from the Sun, you just received the final version?
Not from the Sun. He didn't know if the version existed, but he indicated that boxes and boxes had gone
from
to
the
Australia.
Australian archives. Yes, you only took the final version, or did you have access to the whole interviews, for instance? No,
we did.
You did?
Yeah, but so there's a lot of material that still remains to be published. What we wanted to do was remain faithful to the original Portuguese text.
But you had access also to
all the interviews, or most of them anyway.
And most of that is now available online through the Australian. So
the second question I asked before, but I just wanted to know, how can I access to to this book?
Yep. It's,
Amazon.
Yeah. No, it's sold. I would go to the. Sorry.
FNAC?
Yeah, FNAC
Okay.
has it.
Okay.
The Livraria of the.
El Corte Inglés was carrying
But
it.
there's a book dealer that carries it in Portugal. It's available.
And just a comment, when you spoke about the George Orwell, and you also spoke about the sense how this journalism is treated, like people just have the opinion. They don't trust, but they rely on him. That's it. Just one other example, American example of journalism in a revolution, very well-known book from John Reed, the 10 Days That Shook the World. And the reaction was exactly the same in America.
There's a question in the front.
So
Yeah.
to wrap up, so Leonardo?
I think Onésimo also. No.
No.
I just wanted to know if you would offer any explanation for the fact that such an important journalist, political journalist, became, as you said in the beginning, forgotten. Does it have to do with the discretion, how he was discredited by the US, or what would be your theory?
I think the end of the Cold War, right, and the fact that he passed away in the early 80s, goes a long way. It didn't happen immediately. He was certainly more widely read. I mean, he was widely read, for instance, by the anti-war movement in the United States. Like I came across Jane Fonda, of all people, and a number of other Hollywood characters and whatnot. They threw a fundraiser for him in the 1970s, to help fund his work, because his work for the anti-war movement was such a vital source of information, of an alternative viewpoint on what the war in Vietnam was all about. So, he was discredited by Western governments, especially by the United States and by Australia, but he was widely read on the left, widely read throughout the 60s. I mean, he was a well-known figure in activist circles for sure. And again, his books on Vietnam in particular are probably some of his most famous books. You saw examples of Melo talking about reading the books with, the soldiers reading his books and being influenced by that, which, by the way, is an interesting point of, academic exploration as well, about not that I know, about how the war in Vietnam is actually impacting, right, the consciousness of the soldiers in the Portuguese conflict, which is a fascinating topic by itself, right? Which, as far as I know, there's no work about. But we definitely have lots of elements of that. Sorry, I got lost in my...
Yeah, that's okay. Onésimo, I'd love to hear your question.
No, that was my understanding. I was just to say that academic process, this is not really, it has an academic essay, but it's not really an academic.
No.
Yeah.
And then another thing that John Reed was mentioned. Who knows about John Reed? John dos Passos, well, a novel, but who's reading them? The topics are past. Oriana Falaci,
right. The big question is, like, will it sell? Right.
Yeah, that's the thing.
It is selling, though. I'm happy to report.
And then Portugal. How many presses are interested in Portuguese things? Very, very few. So it's not. I don't see a political reason behind it. Markets, they ask how many. The university presses ask how many universities could use this course in the syllabus. Yeah, they ask that, and they take a look around. How many Portuguese departments are there? Too, and they it's money, much more than, unfortunately, much it's a much more important factor than the ideological.
No, that's a fair point. I appreciate that. Thank you. The one place where one would expect Burchett to be remembered is in Australia, and even up until relatively recently, there's a very strong polemic about Burchett's legacy. There are his supporters who have published biographies about him. There are his detractors who still maintain that he was an agent of communism.
That he was on the pay of the KGB, of which there is no evidence.
No evidence whatsoever. But, it's fascinating to look at how he was remembered. And we did approach the Australian embassy in Lisbon to see if they wanted to host a talk about the book. And they were quite receptive, although we had should I say this? We had to explain to the ambassador exactly who he was. So she has since been recalled, so I can say that. Anyway.
No, I mean, because there was an election. She
Right.
recalled for
Yeah.
anything. No, she was wonderful.
Yeah, I'm not going to create a diplomatic incident
Please.
with Australia.
Conspiracy theories.
Anyway, thank you all so very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to conclude and wrap up, not to conclude and wrap up, just to warn you that we are going to walk towards the place where we are going to have dinner, right? Central Pub, a little bit up the street. Yes, we can put away some of the backpacks in the cars that are available. 500-meter walk upwards, but I
Okay.
think it will be good to leave the
Yes,
room and
yes,
just walk
indeed.
a little
Yes,
bit.
indeed.
So thank you so much, and tomorrow we will be back at 9 o'clock. Okay, but that's for the general.